Have you ever lost your cool with your kids, vowed you'd never do that again, only to find yourself yelling at them an hour later or a few days later? Yeah, that's happened to me too. How about this? Have you ever found yourself lying awake at night wondering if you're doing the right thing or if you made the right decision for your child or if you just totally screwed up their life? Sounds like me too. Well, I want you to know you are not alone. This is what happens to all good parents. But as a child psychiatrist and mother of two, it's my goal as the parent doctor to help you find some useful answers about how you can prevent these things from happening and have each day be better than the last. After all, we all are striving to have a trusting, connected relationship with our kids, and we all want to launch kids who are ready to be adults in this great big world. Parenting is not just about raising successful kids, it's about raising ourselves, mastering our own emotion regulation, breaking cycles, and creating a home and life filled with love, resilience, and connection. If this resonates with you, please join me in the Empowered Parent Club. Follow, rate, and share this podcast with anyone that you know who would benefit from it. Let's get started. Welcome back, everyone. I'm very excited today to be welcoming Dr. Theresa Rose Bajt. She is a clinical psychologist joining us from the beautiful state of Missouri, and she is a mom of two. She has successfully launched two young men into the world who are no longer living in her home. Isn't that amazing? And some of you are going to be listening who have this in common with her. She was widowed about 9 years ago, and so she also has that experience of continuing to parent. Obviously, your job as a parent never ends. We'll be talking a bit about that experience. And she did her dissertation. Tell me more about that.
So my dissertation was entitled Career Salience and First-Time Moms. So salience means importance. And I looked at mothers who were in the workforce, had a child, and I looked at the differences of those who continued in the workforce after they had their first baby and those who discontinued in the workforce. What were the reasons that they stopped working? And I'm going to cut to the point. I looked at what the temperament of the baby was, what their level of education. Everybody had to have a bachelor's degree. And so that meant to me that they have invested something a little bit longer to get into their career, their job. So I also looked at what the income was between the husband and the wife. The other piece is what their level of marriage stability is. And across the board, they had to have, although it was their first child, all the marriages were intact and thriving, for lack of better words. The temperament of baby did change so I interviewed over 200 women.
Wow.
And yeah, it was very ambitious then, in Maryland, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. area. And I actually was turning out like these pamphlets that they had to fill out. And I had my babies with me because I had both my children. So I think my husband had said to me at that point, what great marketing. You had a baby you were carrying and you had one in the stroller. I mean, who could say no, right? Because I really wanted to understand why women continue in the workforce. And so I just want to bring out a couple of points here. Carol Gilligan, who wrote a book called In a Different Voice, is one of my resources I used in my dissertation. And she looked at women who were having a termination, an abortion. And she interviewed those women and she interviewed their partners. And so the women answered, I'm here because this isn't right for him. He doesn't want it. It's the religion, embarrassed my parents. The women always answered in we. And the men said, and it's not the right time. I don't want it. I can't afford it. Men answered in I. So fast forward back into my dissertation piece. And women decided not to go back to work to keep peace in their marriage. If their husband didn't want them to go back to work, they didn't. And if their husband said, yes, I want you to continue working, they did. And so women were keeping the peace. Women primarily think in the we. How is it going to affect me? My husband, my children, my family. It's the we zone.
Yeah.
And they're a year of work, and that's the answer Carol Gilligan found a couple of decades before. We work in the we for the betterment of the whole family.
Okay, I think your research is very interesting and tried to answer this question of, is it to kids' detriment if mom goes back to work? What was the end result? Like, how far along did you follow the kids?
It was just after it was my dissertation, so I wanted to finish my PhD. So it was just after they had the babies had to be under a 1-year-old.
Okay.
Yeah.
long term.
No, it was not long term. I really wanted to finish my PhD and move forward.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm not criticizing you at all, of course. But what was that conclusion? Did you come up with a conclusion that was novel for you?
One thing that I found very interesting, it didn't matter what your husband made. It didn't matter what your joint income was. Money was not a factor because now remember, this is back I had a family that was making $25,000 jointly. He was a graduate student at the University of Maryland. $25,000. I also had a family that was making, this is back in the 1990s now. They were making jointly together $500,000. And both of them decided, I am not continuing back in the workforce. And I used them in the body of my dissertation, explaining it's not about money. It's about peace for women. Because we're resourceful. We can find ways to get around things. And again, in the 1990s, people were at least in a different kind of community where they're exchanging more in a personal way. Now we're doing it with Facebook and the marketplace and all of that.
Are you a parent who wants to read all the parenting books and you have maybe a growing list or stack on your nightstand, but somehow you just never seem to find the time to get to them? If so, I want you to know I'm here to help. Every month on the third Wednesday, I read, summarize, and present a parenting book that I have chosen that I think is a great one. And I do this via Zoom. If you'd like to get into the Empowered Parent Book Club, go to theparentdoctor.com/book club. This is totally free. And everyone who signs up gets access not just to the replay in case they can't make it to the live Zoom, but also to an actionable PDF that I create custom for each book that we read. I would love to have you. This is a growing community now of over 200 members. These are like-minded, engaged, energized, supported parents who want to be more empowered for the sake of their kids. If you'd like to join us, again, please go to theparentdoctor.com/book club. See you there. That's really interesting. But yeah, I mean, you're talking about women being more we-based, and I don't know, I guess I've never been a man. I can't really say what it's like to be a man.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
No, go ahead.
I think that men are now we even have today, between 1990s to 2024, today they have paternity leave. Who had paternity leave in the 1990s? Nobody.
Right.
Now, Amazon, I think, offers 6 weeks of paternity leave.
That's amazing.
Yes. And that's paid, by the way. That's paid. Men are being more, I think, are integrated more. In the 1990s, it was more a division, more of the, I want to say, a traditional coming from the boomer level. Yeah.
Yeah. It definitely resonates for me. I mean, having a child for me, absolutely. When I was making decisions, it was no longer about just what I want. It was totally about what's best for my family as a whole.
Yes.
And that wasn't even something I would consider. And I would say, I have to talk to my husband about this, but I think for men, at least for my husband, I think he shifted much more into that kind of sense of provider role.
Exactly.
So not that, I don't know if it was conscious or intentional, but I think that pressure is on a man once he becomes a father to be the one who's committing his all to earning and providing for the family in every way that he can.
I know we're in the Jetson area, 2024, but we're still mammals, and females are generally speaking, the comfort and the loving and preparing and nesting. And men are, again, as mammals, the hunters. We're going to go out, we're going to conquer, we're going to protect. Right. And that really pulls up more when we have children, when a man has a child, as it does for a female. We start worrying about, we need our sunblock. We just worry about things that we never had worry about before.
Right. That comes down to masculine or feminine energy, that mammalian kind of, innate sense of who we are. Of course, it's not just gender-based. I know plenty of women who love what they do and have the higher earning position, who have remained the primary breadwinner in their family, and their husbands stay home with the kids when the kids are young and need that extra support. And that works fine for them too.
And that more reflects of times now than it did in the 1990s.
Yeah, no, but I just know several women who are doing that and have done that successfully.
Yes.
Their families are happy that way. So it doesn't necessarily matter. I think all these things are possible. I think the key is really making sure that both people are on the same page, because you're absolutely right. It's not going to be good for the relationship if one person resents the fact that the other one isn't home with their new baby. And hopefully they discuss that before they had a child, because as we both know, When you have a child, your whole life kind of explodes.
It totally. Yeah. There's a new section that comes into your brain that you didn't know existed.
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so that segues a little bit into something we previewed talking about today in this podcast, and that is what's the difference? Because you raised kids earlier, right? Like you raised your kids.
Yeah. My kids are in their 30s now, early, just arriving.
So,
Yes.
what do you see as a clinician now working with parents in 2024 about the differences for modern parents versus your experience raising your boys when you did?
Back in the old days, we would come into our homes and the TVs would come off at 10 o'clock and we didn't have news around the clock. We had the suppers and things where if the kids were in sports teams, you did have those activities. Now there is no shut off at all for social media, for iPhones, for YouTube. It is 24/7. There is no downtime. Everything is still coming at our kids and at us. And our brains need rest. We need connection. More than anything else, we need connection with each other. That was one of the things that COVID showed, is that when people got disconnected, it really brought up a lot of anxiety. I was busier than ever during COVID and after COVID, people going back into the workforce. So the biggest difference, one of the biggest differences, there are a number, is we were more central as in family compared to now we are taking it for our resources. Now we're getting resources from all over the world and opinions from all over the world. And here is what I would consider, which I talk to my clients about, my young mothers, what on Instagram and what you're seeing on Facebook isn't necessarily true. They've got screens, they've got makeup, people who help them. They do their backgrounds. That's not the truth.
Right.
Don't try to live your life in that way. Don't try to compare yourself. It's maddening.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. My husband and I were actually just talking about this recently, how it just never turns off, both for the kids, right? Because we think about social media and YouTube and all the screen time kids get. But for us as adults too, when you have a cell phone where your work can email you at all hours, call meetings at all hours, patients can ping you at all hours, and in multiple channels, right? I mean, it was annoying to be a resident in the early 2000s with a pager that could go off, but now a patient can email me, can text message me. There's so many channels that I have to be constantly aware of. It leads our survival brains that are constantly scanning for threats on overdrive because there's just so many places where we can expect things to be arriving from.
Well said. Yes.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I think more than ever, it's important for us as parents to model separating ourselves from all of that, turning it all off.
Turning it off, showing
Putting it
attention.
away.
I had a client who was a graduate student, and she chose what I thought was a fantastic research project, small one, locally here in St. Louis. And this is before COVID. We had a couple of malls here that had the play centers where mothers would come and the kids would all play. And all she did would go to these play centers and monitor and time how much time they actually had with touch and interaction with their child and on their phone and what the ratio was. Does anyone, studio audience, does anybody want to guess what she calculated?
Having lived through it myself, I know that I really valued like some alone time when I would bring my kids to places like that, let them go play for an hour and let me sit here and have some mommy time. So I'm sure it was like 90% plus on the phone.
Yes. And lower interaction on the kids. And that's a huge difference right there. And when I brought my kids to graduate housing, our little play area, all of us mothers would talk to each other.
Yeah.
We would watch the kids, but we would talk to each other about what is this, what's that, blah, blah, blah. And now they don't do that. People are looking at their phone.
It's true. There's a lot less community interaction. I try to really be intentional with that. Actually, if I'm like waiting at the airport or at the doctor's office, I don't pull out my phone. But what you find is that everyone else is on their phone. So having those kind of casual conversations that you would strike up in such an environment is harder to do now than it used to be because you feel like you're interrupting someone in the midst of doing their Wordle or whatever.
And you're the extrovert.
I'm relatively extroverted. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I'm the introvert. So when I go to the airport, I find, okay, that's my escape is I can read. I still read books like paper. And I still do the magic marker kind of thing around the sides. I'm still very old fashioned that way. And I enjoy that. But
That's good. Whatever works for you.
yeah,
Right.
my books are my friends in that sense because I can reread them with all my notes.
That's great. Yeah. No, I still value a paper copy of whatever I'm doing too. It's interesting because my son is 12, and now all their homework and their textbooks are online. This is so foreign to me. So when he does math homework and I'm helping him, it's hard for me to get him to write it out on a piece of paper. He wants to just type it into the computer. And I'm like, I can't do this. I can't help you do algebra by typing it. I have to see it.
Yeah.
I have to touch it and play with it. But his brain is working differently. Like he's learned how to do it a different way.
Yeah, they're developing their brain differently than we developed our brain. I was in school in the 1960s. So my brain is developed very differently and I memorize differently because of that than the kids today.
Yeah. So what do you think that's going to mean? I mean, it's easy for us, I think. I'm Gen X. Like, it's easy for us to think, oh, these kids are so on their devices. They have no social skills, whatever. But I don't want people to feel hopeless because I know that it's not hopeless either. It's difficult, but it's not hopeless. What do you think we as parents need to be conscious of and really working on when it comes to making sure that our kids aren't going to be lonely and feel isolated? Because the wonderful thing is they're going to have connection to more people all around the world than we ever could have hoped to have had, which is great. But by sitting in a cafe, it may feel more lonely and hard to approach people because everybody's behind their devices. So what do we have to do to help our kids?
I think that the most important thing a parent can do is, and I really mean this, is matters of some level because we want to teach them how to get along in the world without us.
Yeah.
Right? We want them to be successful outside of our house. And that means knowing how to speak to somebody else and being respectful of their space, their time, whatever, right?
Yeah.
So we do that by taking away some of their computer time and iPhone time and having interactions as a family. Playing board games, play card games. What's your high and low today? Actually have some discussions rather than sitting on the phones.
Yes. Intentionally planning face-to-face time where phones aren't present at home, at dinner.
Correct.
I love playing board games with my kids and charades with my kids and all those things. I just presented a book. I do a monthly book club, and Wednesday it was the book Thrivers by Dr. Michelle Borba. She's an education specialist with over 40 years of experience, and she had so many great tips in there. One of them was something she calls Connect 4, and it's such a practical tip, so let's share it here. It was make eye contact, smile,
yes,
their name, and then if they tell you their name, ask them if they would like to play with you. So it's like a very simple instruction manual for kids. But I think, honestly, it applies to us adults, too. If you make eye contact with someone and smile and then say, hi, I'm Marissa. What's your name? That's how you introduce yourself to someone. And our kids are missing that because so much of their interaction is on text. And one thing I worry about is, I don't know if you're familiar, I can't remember the researcher's name, but there was a UCLA researcher who studied how we communicate likes and dislikes and found that 55% of the communication is from body language, 37% or 38% is from tone of voice, and only 7% is the actual words. So as kids now are communicating so much more just with text,
yes,
they use emojis, but I think an emoji doesn't convey nearly the same things that seeing a human's body language and tone of voice conveys. They're filling in this big gap of what someone means in an anxious way a lot of the time because they're trying to understand, but their brain is going crazy with, did they mean it like this or did they mean it like that?
Right. I think I'm going to go with one more practical idea. My husband was a corporate climber. We lived in Maryland, Tennessee, Pennsylvania, and Missouri. So every time we got a promotion, we moved.
Wow.
And I know the research. I did not follow the research until we moved here in Missouri. But the research is to move a child in the middle of the school year, not at the beginning. Now, I know that everyone's because when you move a child in the school year, and I followed that when we moved here to Missouri, that child's going to be immediately identified as new and special.
Oh, okay.
And he is new and special. But if you move a child at the beginning, like people do move in the summer, and he starts the school or she starts the school year in September, they're just going to be seen as the group, right? And not have any friends.
Interesting.
So you move a child in the school year, not in the summer. So they get the advantage of being special, having a friend, a buddy assigned to them, which both my boys did at that point.
That's very
Um,
nice. I love that.
the other thing is
Really?
every time we moved, I had my sons invite one friend that they liked in the first week or two to the house. And we had like a scavenger hunt or a bonfire or something, but we did something to help the friendship along.
Yeah.
The difference between boys and girls, and there are differences between boys and girls, but boys to be in the group was have a friend with the boys. You need to have the right toys. So it's boys and toys. Girls, I'm going to get to girls in a minute. But so when we moved, I always made sure we had the greatest playground in our backyard, or we had the baseball diamond in our front yard. I did something to attract that the boys would have the right toys, so to speak. For girls, we are beautiful. We're just very different. The girls, it's about relationship.
Yeah.
Is the other girl nice to me? Does she remember my name? Does he invite me to play with her? For girls, it's really about relationships to start a new friendship. It's really about how you relate. Boys start that bond with the toys. This is for younger children. But if you see men, you talk men, if a man's wearing an LA Dodgers or a Cubs, yep, they're going to, hey, you could fit. I mean, it just goes from there because it's a toy, right? That's their thing, right? Or Cardinals, right?
Yes.
I'm from Chicago, so I always say Cubs, Phillies, Cardinals. Yeah.
Right. It's the commonality, whereas it's seeking that commonality with women. It doesn't have to be so external. I think you're right.
We are different.
All right. So shifting gears a little bit, we're going to talk about some classic psychology. So Dr. Bajt is going to share the Harlow monkey experiment. And okay, go talk about it.
Okay. So there was a psychologist, his last name was Harlow, 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 1950s. It's called the wired monkey. You all can look this up. It's fascinating. So they had two monkeys. First of all, they had a small baby monkey, and then they had two mechanical monkeys. One was called the wired monkey. It's not barbed wire. It's just wire. And it had a breast that gave milk out. Can I say breast or tit? Actually, they say tit, but what can I say? I don't know. It had a tit that gave milk out.
It's a mother monkey shaped wire structure, right?
Yes.
So it's made to
Yes.
look like, you can look this up on YouTube, I think. So you can look,
Yes.
I'll put the link down below in the show notes.
Oh, thank you.
If
Yeah.
you look this up, the videos will show a baby monkey like running to the wire monkey that has the milk.
And he gets the milk.
And so the baby gets the milk from the wire monkey, but
Then there is the other monkeys at the same exact shape. But here is the golden difference. That monkey has a very soft blanket on it, like a fleece blanket, and it's warm and cozy. And so the monkey would drink, get its nourishment within 2 minutes. You're going to see it on YouTube that quick. And then it jumps into the arms, the wire arms that is covered with the soft blanket material. And that's the monkey it stayed on. That's the monkey it hung with.
yeah.
So again, the emotional attachment comes from feeling warm and comfortable. As you had mentioned earlier, someone like the smile, that was for friendship, but that's when your child walks in the room, just smile and hug them. That's what they need. The experiment doesn't end there. And this is what I think is another very interesting part, is they expand the experiment and they have another room where the room is filled with all different kinds of toys and things to climb on, just like something that little monkey can investigate. And in that room, they had the wire monkey with the breast that gave milk. The monkey goes up and gets the milk and then hangs around the wired monkey, gets off, but just hangs around, doesn't investigate, doesn't play with anything, just really doesn't engage. They take the wire monkey out, and then they put in the felt monkey, or the monkey that's warm and comfortable. That monkey, of course, jumps in its arms, smothers, gets the loving in, jumps off, and then goes off to plays with all the other toys, investigates, and it has so much more freedom because it had felt it from the comfortable meshed the blanket monkey, which again, the emotional attachment, because that's when it's stealing by being warm and cuddled, gives that monkey the courage and the strength to explore. And that's what we want to do for our kids. Get them to be adults and enjoy the world.
Right, exactly. To have them be strong enough and brave enough to explore.
Yeah, and that's it. The monkey was enjoying exploring, enjoying it.
So these are classical experiments. Now, some listeners are going to be like, what the heck? It's just a monkey. And first, some people might be upset because it sounds cruel. Honestly, as you're describing it, and I'm thinking about the videos it's for monkey, I'm thinking, I don't think you can do these experiments today.
Well, I think one of and it's a very good experiment. It's it learned helplessness. You probably have heard about that. Cruel parents do that. No matter what a child does, they discourage it. And we've got to be positive. And one of the things we have to teach our children is resilience. Yeah. Because it's not so easy out there.
So the experiment that Theresa's talking about it's dogs in cages.
It's a dog in a cage. And so they have a dog in the cage is large. And on one side is where the dog can lay and rest. And on the other side is where they put the food. So when they give the dog its food, the dog goes over and eats the food. And this happens over time. And he's used to when the food is slipped in, he goes and eats it. What happens, this is the cool part, is they put the food in and then they would have a shock. And so when the dog would go over to get the food, he would be shocked. And they did that a couple of times. And the dog just a few times. The dog just stopped going for the food. It just learned to be helpless. They stopped the shocks. They tried to encourage the dog, and the dog would not go and eat.
Right.
When you've learned like nothing I do matters, you stop trying. And as parents, again, resilience, get up. We can do this. The positive parenting is so important. So our kids do get up, because every single person has had a blow in their life. And, losing my husband was like, wow, okay, I got to get up. I got to get going. I got to look at my world differently now. Yeah. And you have to have the strength and the fortitude, which we learned from our parents, and we learned from our parents' coaching to keep going. I mean, how do you get through medical school? You might have had 1 or 2 or 500 tough times.
Yeah, I think I blocked it out. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about what we're talking about.
Oh, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, no, so the Harlow monkey experiment relates a lot to experiments and data that we have about real humans as well. Again, we didn't know these things, so we can't be so critical about people in the past because they didn't know what we know, right? So like after World War II, there were a lot of kids in orphanages, and people did the best they could to make sure that these children had nourishment, right? Like the breast in the wire mother. But it wasn't enough. And so humans really need that connection, that safety, that felt safety that the monkey got from the mesh mother with the felt on top. Right. And this is why you'll see kids in orphanages who have real failure to thrive. Like they will stop eating because it's not just food that our bodies need. And human infants are so dependent for so long. If you think about other animals, you probably watched Animal Planet and you see some baby giraffe born, and like within a few minutes, it's up walking around looking for something to eat, right? Like humans, it takes a year for that to happen. So we're basically born underdeveloped, completely dependent on our parents for safety. Therefore, every human being that makes it to adulthood has been loved. Someone put their needs before your own. But there's basic love being met enough that you survive, and then there's real love where you're attached to this person securely. So I was thinking about like the work of secure and insecure attachments. This is making me think of the attachment research of John Bowlby and Martha Ainsworth. I remember at residency being shown videos of John Bowlby's research with kids. And again, this was in England, probably in the early part of the 20th century. I don't know exactly when he did this research, but they would show a young child, probably like 3 years old or so, whose mother was going to the hospital to have a second child. And again, they didn't know, right? There were no child development specialists back then who would like preview with this kid, and the hospital had some kind of place where you could put your older kid in the nursery while you were having your second child. And the father could come visit for a night or two and then take you home. But they would videotape these kids arriving to this strange place, being given what they needed in terms of food and some attempt at the warm mothering of the felt monkey. But, these are strangers. So, of course, this kid is, who are you? And
Right.
it's around them. And then father would come, and then finally mother would come, and this kid would just be like, oh, you'd see the emotion in this kid. So we now know that kids understand so much more at a very young age, even when they're pre-verbal. They understand a lot more when we communicate to them than we think that they do.
Oh,
And
yes.
so that's one thing I want people to take away from this episode is even if your kid is 1 or 2 and you think that having a conversation with them is going to go over their head, again, most of the communication is in your body language and in your tone. So
And
even
your face, for a mother, the
no,
reaction.
yeah,
Yes.
even if they don't understand everything that you're saying, if there's going to be a big change coming up, your reassurance in whatever way you can give it is going to help them so much to handle whatever it is. Are they going to have a separation anxiety and an emotional response? Yes. Do you need to feel horrible about that? No.
No.
And then when you come back again, you just want to tell what happened. And this is the work of Dan Siegel now with really helping kids with language after a traumatic event or a difficult event. Yes, this happened and then mommy came back and now we're okay. Again, the example of John Bowlby, I don't think those parents had any clue because again, we didn't know. Like we just thought kids are kids and they have no clue and they won't remember. But whatever that trauma was for this little boy to be dropped off at a strange place with nurses and left there for a few nights and then home with a mom and a new baby and no one explains anything to him. And this is very personal for me because my story, I didn't tell you this, but my dad, when he was 3, was given up by his mom to his maternal grandparents. And this was in 1956. So my grandmother and her husband, their marriage didn't last. And she was living in Texas and her parents were up in New Hampshire. Her husband was a gambler and drinking a lot. And so she didn't want to leave my dad with her husband. So she shipped my dad off to her parents. And my dad was just like one of these kids in John Bowlby's research, right? He presumably met this grandpa he'd never met before, was put in the car and drove from San Antonio, Texas to New Hampshire in 1956. I can't imagine what that would be like in summertime.
Long drive. Yeah.
Long drive, long, boring drive for a young kid with an old man that he doesn't know. And I'm sure I didn't meet my great-grandfather ever, but I know that he was a stoic guy. So I doubt there was a lot of warm, fuzzy conversation to reassure him. And so these things happen. And if we don't use words to explain, then it leaves a lasting mark. I mean, that separation, I can tell you, because my dad became an alcoholic and he died at age 70 last year, it left a mark on him. So I think this is so important, this research about the monkeys. It's relevant because attachment forms early. And it forms from our communication, our body language, our warmth, not just feeding our kids and making sure they're cared for physically, but also being there for them so that they can feel a secure home base.
So I'll share a personal story. So on the birth of my first son, I had a DIC, which is a disseminated intravascular coagulation, bleeding to death.
Yeah.
And so I had body holds between 10 and 12 units. I lost 9 units.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So I was in ICU. I was in the hospital a month. And I had just given birth to my son. And it's an emergency C-section. But when Christopher, my firstborn, was brought into the nursery, one of the nurses told me that when they brought Christopher in, there was like 3 or 4 nurses standing there. And the nurse said, "This mother may not make it."
Oh, gosh.
And from then on, because I was in the hospital a month,
Wow.
Christopher was the star. The
Oh.
nurses were passing him back and forth. "How's the mom? Is she out of ICU yet?" I mean, it was, for him to come into the world, it was very obviously a tough event.
Yeah.
But he had so much nurse just being held and loved. And then my mother came in from Chicago to South in Maryland, and she did a 12-hour shift of holding that Christopher. And he's my moon guy now. He's out there in Texas. But at a beginning often can be tragic, but there are other things that can happen along the way that can, and I don't want to say make up for it, but hold it together.
Yeah, totally.
And I totally agree with what you said about when something happens to a child, to explain it to them, because they don't have the cognitive structure to understand that this is short term. It's not long term. When they don't feel like they have control, which kids really don't, but let them feel it, it'll help the anxiety subside, because that's part of anxiety, is feeling like I don't have any control over this.
Yeah, totally. And I can relate to, as a parent, that awareness as it grows of kids understanding what time means. When they're really young, it's like, what's tomorrow? What's yesterday? No, now, and not now. And then, like, my daughter used to always say tomorrow when she meant the past or the future. It just was like tomorrow. It's like not
Yeah.
now. And then now she's almost 8 and she's very much anticipating the winter holidays because my sister and her kids are coming out here to California. And so she was asking, like, how many more days till the cousins come? And I was like, oh, very soon, actually, like 5 or 6 weeks. And then I looked at my phone and I was like, no, actually, it's 4 weeks and 2 days, 30 days. As I'm thinking, that's really soon. And she was like, 30 days. Exactly your point. That, like, for an 8-year-old, 30 days feels like forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, that's going to go like that so fast. Yeah, so these examples are scary examples. The learned helplessness, too, I view that as similar to PTSD, right? So this dog has this trauma of getting shocked and then doesn't want to go get shocked again.
Yeah. That's a great correlation, by the way. Very good.
But essentially, the path out is to allow yourself to venture out in a safe space. So even if your parent wasn't able to be the felt monkey for you, and you know that you have these issues, trusting and everything, like, you still can learn to trust, but you have to open your heart to it, right? And just like someone with PTSD can learn to be calm and comfortable in situations, but that's never going to happen unless you venture into what feels uncomfortable right now. So I think that's the work that I do. And it sounds like that's the work I'm sure that you do too, with people who are living less than the fullest life they could because of past experiences and traumas.
I believe everybody has a childhood wound. I have a spiritual bend to my practice, and I will often say to clients, what do you think your childhood wound is? And what do you think you keep repeating? And we are here to heal ourselves. We're here to get better. And sometimes it's painful. It's really painful. Yeah. I focus on the positivity of a wound and how it is that brings us strength and courage and then resilience. And again, that's what I think we should teach our children is resilience. Yeah, you're going to fail, but that's going to happen, but you got to keep going.
I think that's really true. So I want to help people really connect with their kids forever, to have a relationship that's going to be dynamic and flexible so they can go wherever and they can still stay proud of them and connected to them and not have any needs or expectations that their child needs to meet. Because like you're saying, our goal is to launch full people who can then run away from us as far as they want, but always know that they can come back.
I'm from immigrant families. Both my parents were born here, but my grandparents and some of my aunts and uncles were born in Poland/Russia and Yugoslavia or Croatia.
Mm-hmm.
So both my parents, neither of my parents even went to high school. My dad went maybe a year and a half. My mom didn't even, she graduated 8th grade because they're from really poor families.
Yeah.
And they had nothing when their families moved here, absolutely nothing, except my mom's from a family of 6, 7 kids, and my dad's from 11 children.
Wow.
Yeah. So getting an education is what my sister and I heard growing up our whole lives is get a good education. And both of us did, but they considered that a way out. And I also think a part of it is, and I'm not saying everyone should stay in their marriage. I'm not saying that at all. And there are marriages that are absolutely horrible. But sometimes when the marriages dissipate and both moms and dads go off and try to find somebody because we're still Noah's Ark 2 by 2, and they don't choose better or healthy, then the cycle digs in deeper and harder. With my clients, I go, what do you think is your pattern here, your spiritual wound? I mean, because you keep going out with, I always say third parties. So this guy was drugs, this guy was alcohol, this guy was porno. They always had a third party in your relationship. Why can't you just have somebody who just has you? Do you see this pattern?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love my work. I help people see their patterns that they create and that they can create a better life for themselves. I mean, they are the best predictor for their future.
Yes, I totally agree.
And forgiveness, what you brought up earlier, I so appreciate you bringing that up because I've been doing this for a long time. And years ago, people did not blame their parents as they are today, which I find and it's their bitterment toward their parents of not forgiving. And my parent did this. And I go, so they were horrible. Valerie, I'm sorry you had one bad childhood. but you have years of adulthood. Let's work on the day to day.
Right. You just have your present moment that you can control. Yeah.
Yeah.
Look
And
what
we have
happened in
so many tools to help people now. I mean, we have EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprogramming. That's very good for people with trauma. That's exceptionally good. Find a
Do you
good
do that?
practitioner.
Do you do EMDR?
I do.
Okay, excellent.
I
Yes.
do.
EMDR is one of the approved treatments for PTSD.
Trauma. Yes.
Trauma. Yeah. And basically, if anyone is listening and you're a parent and you have a history of personal trauma, and it could be big or small, right? It really is all relative. But if you feel and know that there's something from your past that is still impacting you, having a child is for sure going to bring that up. I think. Don't you see this?
I absolutely. You become very traditional with what's bothering you because you give it to your kids.
Yeah, and the anxieties that you have as they go through that stage, as they reach that age, as they start interacting with whatever it was that hurt you, it's going to come up. So you owe it to yourself and to your kids to do that work for yourself, to break through that so that you can be the warm felt monkey,
Yes.
mama or dada for your child, because basically when our trauma causes us to live in our survival mind, we become the wire monkey because we shut down to protect ourselves.
And we push other people away and we're short. We just don't have quality, loving relationships when we're living in the, I got to survive and you could hurt me.
Right. Because you're afraid. When you're living in fear,
Yeah.
got walls up. You're not being vulnerable. You're not being authentic. You're not being open because it feels safer to be withdrawn, but you miss out on so much. So, yeah, I think that's really.
And that penetrates in all relationships in our marriages. We want to have good marriages for good families and our happy children. It's the central core is yourself. That is our best instrument is yourself with your children and in your marriage or partnerships of whatever nature. But healing yourself is the very best thing you can do for the world and for your family.
I think that's a perfect way for us to end today.
Okay.
So much, Theresa. This is great.
Thanks.
So again, if anyone wants to reach out to Theresa, if you'd like to learn about working with Dr. Bajt, you can find her information. Her LinkedIn profile is going to be down below in the show notes. And I really appreciate you joining us and sharing your expertise and experience here.
Thank you for having me.